What should beginners begin with when it comes to drawing, painting, and any other two-dimensional art form? This might seem like a simple question, and perhaps it is, but it definitely pivots off of a couple other points, a couple other questions you likely need to ask yourself. When each of us start our artistic journey, we're starting from a unique place. This is, of course, rather obvious if you stop and think about it for a moment, and yet it can be something that eludes you as you begin to dive in. And that fact can sometimes be rather discouraging. After all, if you and a group of your friends are all getting into art at the first time, it can be very easy to compare yourself to one another, to see your friend who seems to be accelerating far more quickly than you, or another who is just slow on the uptake. But the reality is, each of you is starting from a distinct and personal position. And this is going to inform the answer to this question. What should you, as a beginner, begin with when it comes to art? Well, my name is Zach, and welcome to episode 87 of the podcast. Today, obviously, we're talking about beginning. Beginning again, beginning for the first time, or maybe even just restarting. As usual, I'm going to explore what I mean by the topic and then go over how this might actually affect you as an artist. Though, as I'm now doing at the end of the podcast, I'm going to give my personal thoughts on it and a little bit of my personal perspective as well, so stay tuned for that. And as we get started, I would love if you would share below in the comments, what was beginning your artistic journey like for you? Did you start from nothing? Did you pick back up some pieces? Or did you pick up something that you had really put a lot of time into and abandoned due to life circumstances? Let me know in the comments below. Well, first of all, what do I mean by beginners? I've kind of alluded to the fact that this is obviously going to be broken up into several categories, so let's start with that. The categories I'll be referring to today are not exhaustive, but I have to start somewhere, and that's starting from absolute zero, taking it seriously for the first time, or restarting an old journey. So, starting from absolute zero is likely the least common, but it will occur. This is your category if you have not done anything artistic since you were a little kid, perhaps less than 10 years old. Maybe you enjoyed drawing and crafting as a kid, but either due to life circumstances or pressure from those around you, you moved on and are only now looking back. Taking it seriously for the first time, well, this category is assuming you had a couple art classes here and there, or perhaps you just played around with drawing at some point. This is most people, I think. At least most people that now have an interest in art. This is the I never really took art seriously, but I always kind of enjoyed it category. And the last of these three is restarting. This is you if you had ambitions of art at some point. It was a huge part of your life perhaps. Maybe you went to art school or had the desire to, but other things got in the way. Now, perhaps reflecting on your life or simply finding yourself with the time or the long dormant desires rearing their heads, you have a desire to get back into things. So now, I guess let's take a quick peek at each of these and talk about some really useful starting points. If one of these really fits you, feel free to jump ahead to the timestamps in the description and skip the others so you can listen to what applies to you. Well, let's begin with the most logical starting point, starting at zero. So, this is a rather interesting category, and this kind of assumes that basically you've just decided you are going to start working on developing artistic skills and you have zero background in it. I am still making some assumptions here. I'm from the United States. I live in Colorado in the middle of the United States, and there's a couple things I can assume about a young adult who's starting art for the first time, even if they've never taken an art class and they haven't worked with anything other than crayons or markers in the past. You have probably spent a lot of time writing. You've probably spent a lot of time with a pencil or a pen as you've went through your 12 years, 13 years of obligatory education here in the United States. What that means is that you have some fine motor skills when it comes to working with a pencil or a pen. Those things are crucial and they will help apply all of the new skills that you're going to learn artistically. If you don't have that, if you've somehow grown up in a place where you have no fine motor skills with a pencil or a pen, or that's really, really difficult for you, then this journey is going to be a little bit more difficult. And that's perhaps going to be an absolute zero. And if that's you, then learning how to write is going to be the best thing you can do. But that is probably the absolute smallest percentage of people. More likely, you are just a young adult who has decided that art is something you'd like to invest some time in, and you understand how a pencil works, how a pen works. If that's you, welcome to the journey. And yay, it's always good to see new folks embarking on that journey, and it's really rewarding as well. Those of us who have been at it for a long time cannot help but get excited when we see new people coming along for the ride. So there's two main things that a beginner should begin with if this is you. And I'm going to cover these in a kind of rambling way, as I am wont to do. The first is the fundamentals, and the second is the fun. I couldn't resist the bad joke there as I was typing this up, so it's the funs and the fun. In all seriousness though, these two are a good way to look at things. The fundamental skills which will help you grow and progress and tackle new things, and the fun pursuits that really make all of this worth it. I cannot talk to the fun aspects too much, as they will be highly individualized, so we will tarry here for just a moment before jumping back to the fundamentals. But it's really key to make sure that at least half of your art time as a beginner is focused on the stuff that brings you happiness and joy. This is the secret to sticking to art for a long time, if there is any secret at all. And honestly, for finding the most satisfaction possible in the pursuit, you're going to have to seek after that joy. So think about what got you excited about art in the first place. What pulled you in? What got you excited and pulled you out of your shell enough to take this step, to jump into art in the first place? Maybe it was some of your favorite movies. Maybe you've started really visualizing things that you're hearing in your audiobooks or that you're reading about in the books that you're going through in the evenings. Maybe it's some video games, which was definitely a huge part of what it was for me in my youth, seeing all these cool characters in beautiful Technicolor on my original and my Super Nintendos. Maybe it's just the wonderful world around you. In Colorado here, we've gotten a ton of rain lately, and though this is a pretty dry, barren area, we've gotten so much rain lately that everything is green and beautiful, and the frogs and toads are just starting to come out, and all the birds are everywhere. It's easy to be inspired by those things and decide that it's time to start making some art. But whatever that is for you, whether it's just imbibing of the beauty, excited about these other things, even seeking to use art as a therapeutic means to work through things in your life, whatever that is, I would encourage you to write it down and to stick to it. Remember, that is your purpose and the whole reason that you're diving in here. It's good to come back to that whenever things get kind of funky or tough, and they probably will. Even as an early stage beginner, things will be difficult every once in a while. And that's probably another thing just to remember, that the difficulty is part of the journey. This sounds trite, I know, but it can be alienating and make you feel like you're less than everyone else if you don't know that it's going to come down the pipeline. If you are an artist who is working on your craft and trying to hone your skills for the first time and you have no other artists in your life and it feels like this massive struggle, it's really easy to trick yourself into thinking, I must just not be capable of doing this because it's hard. When in reality, it's hard for everyone pretty much. And you just don't see that struggle because art is often done in seclusion. It's not like sports where you might struggle to learn how to dribble the basketball for the first time, but you're also watching a couple other people on the court who are struggling as well. Art doesn't give you that option. You can't necessarily see everyone else struggling. And of course, with all of our social media nowadays, people pretty much just post the stuff that they like. So you're not seeing those crummy, gross, ugly sketchbook pages. So just anticipate the struggle and know that it's part of the thing. It doesn't make you any less capable as an artist. So that kind of encompasses the fun element, at least for a beginner. I would love to spend more time here, but as I mentioned earlier, it's really specific to you. And whatever that specific thing is that got you excited, I would spend at least 50% of your artistic time working on those things, copying from stuff, enjoying what pulled you into art in the first place. But secondarily, the fundamentals are a really good place to put time. This is the unique set of skills and techniques that you can keep developing that will help with the execution of your art. I tend to focus more on two-dimensional art here, skirting around sculpture and metalsmithing and ceramics and all those lovely, wonderful things, because they're just a little bit outside my wheelhouse. 3D art certainly has its own set of fundamentals, but the ones that I tend to focus on are specific to two-dimensional art. This includes things like line, value, which means shading in artistic terms, shape, form, perspective, texture, and many others. These fundamentals are the basic pieces of learning art, like dribbling or shooting or layups in basketball. They aren't always fun things to practice, but they're the building blocks. Each level of mastery will equip you with more tools to accomplish what you want and to make those things better more easily. I actually have a whole podcast that I came out with recently on the fundamentals, so if this is you, I would encourage you to go check that out, and I will have it linked in the description below. However, before we move on, I think it only makes sense to bring this question up. How do you actually study the fundamentals? Because I haven't talked about that here. I've talked about the fact that you should focus on the things that bring you joy, that got you excited about art, and that you should practice the fundamentals. Well, I'm not going to go over them in this video. I'm just talking about the fact that they are an important thing for you to do. I have that podcast talking about them. I would encourage you to check it out. But honestly, the best thing you can do for yourself is simply look up the fundamentals of whatever art form you're going to be working on. Let's say that you're going to be working with pen and ink. I would literally just close this video once you're done listening and go to another part of YouTube where you can search for things and type in the fundamentals of ink drawing. Watch a couple videos on that. Start with short ones, go to longer ones, pause things, work on following along with what the artists and the instructors are doing. Take lots of notes, come back to things, skills that seem difficult to you, come back and practice them again and again and again. And then seek ways to implement these and to integrate them with the stuff that brings you joy. This is probably the best time ever in human history to learn an art form because the fundamentals are so accessible. I'm not covering them here because A, it's not the purpose of this podcast, but B, it's going to be different depending on whatever specific medium you're working on. But there's no shame in this. I know some people can feel a little bit awkward, like they need to do everything themselves at the beginning. You don't. All these resources exist. So whatever medium it is that you are taking on for the first time, go find somebody who can give you those basics. I do have some videos on this channel that are good for like absolute basics of pen and ink drawing, but honestly, Alphonso Dunn is a much better ink drawer than me, and I would encourage you to go check him out if you want to work on ink drawing. But there are so many other artists on this platform alone that can give you the fundamentals and just help you start in a really beautiful, wonderful way. I just didn't want to leave you hanging with like, yes, go practice the fundamentals, and then be like, so how do I do that? That's how I would do that. I would look up the fundamentals of the specific medium that you are applying yourself to, follow along with a couple videos. I think it's always good to take a look at 2 or 3 because if you get one of those as kind of a weird outlier and they say things that contradicts the others, you'll be able to take a look at that and make a decision for yourself based on what makes the most sense. But that is how I would actually approach imbibing of those fundamentals. Understand too, it's going to take a while. If you're starting from absolute zero working on art, if you want to get to a good level of skill, you're going to see some progress in a couple months, but realistically, an hour a day over the course of 6 months or 9 months, you're going to see tremendous progress. It's going to take some time. So buckle in, find a way to enjoy it, and that's also why it's so important to make sure that at least half of your art time is going into joy-filled creation. The last thing that I want to talk about here is that you should probably try to do a lot of copying at this stage. This can be one of the best strategies to teach you what art you like and to show you how quickly you are growing. I know copying sometimes gets a bad reputation, but for beginner artists, it is perhaps the best way to learn quickly. And frankly, it's fun. I spent so much of my youth copying from the game manuals and from all of the books that I had that were dedicated to things like Donkey Kong and the Metroid games and Mega Man. I learned a lot of my basic art skills from just opening up those books and manuals and copying things down. I also had a lot of eyewitness books, primarily with reptiles and amphibians, because that was kind of my niche area of focus as a young kid, and I would copy things from them. So drawing tons and tons of lizards and snakes and alligators and things like that eventually built up the repertoire of skills that I was able to draw those things even when I didn't have something in front of me. And when you're a kid, obviously nobody berates you for copying things. We sometimes do as we get older, sometimes we do it to ourselves, sometimes we have teachers who do it. But the reality is this is just how you learn for most humans, is you copy reality in order to get better. So I would encourage you to, as a beginner, start copying things that you enjoy. Specifically, I would find art to copy, not just reality. Because when you copy someone else's art, you're often gleaning a lot of the decisions that they made to simplify things. If you look at cartoons of humans, for example, they're obviously way simpler than just a portrait of a human would be. All of the details from a photograph are a little bit overwhelming to a beginner artist, and it's much easier if you look at just the couple lines that are used to sculpt out Calvin and Hobbes' head, when you're working from something like that. So I would encourage you to work from cartoons, even if that's not really what your end goal is. It'll just help you to understand the basics, and it won't be quite as overwhelming as starting from photographs. So, mixed in with your study of fundamentals and enjoying drawing, try to copy some things. Copy things from your favorite video games, your favorite sports team logos, your favorite movies. It's motivating, and especially if you work from drawings and cartoons, it can be pretty inviting to beginners. So if you're starting from zero, welcome to the show. It's a wonderful and lovely journey, and one that will hopefully last your entire lifetime. Take it slowly and try to enjoy every step along the way. The journey can be as long as you want it to be, and you really can continue to develop those skills almost infinitely. They can just keep getting better and better and better and better. There's not really a ceiling. So if you're into something like that, it can be incredibly rewarding. And again, welcome aboard. All right, the second category I have dubbed taking it seriously, perhaps for the first time. This is likely the broadest category of people, though I could be wrong. I am assuming that if this is you, some of those basic skills lie long dormant in the back of your mind. You probably have a little bit of knowledge about perspective, maybe you remember how to draw cubes or shade a sphere. Maybe you have some art history knowledge from college, or maybe you copied a lot of anime when you were younger. If this is you, welcome back. The world has changed, but yet art is still here. It's still a welcoming and warm community. And likely, if you feel drawn back in, it's because there's some need in you to accomplish something artistically. Maybe you feel like you have something that you need to say. Maybe you, like me, just have to create in order to really feel like you're, living as a human. I know that might sound strange to some of you, but if I go for too many days where I don't create anything, I don't write, I don't draw, I start to become a worse version of me. It's almost like eating healthily or working out. It's something I have to do to take care of myself. So if that's you, this is likely a really good movement in your life. And maybe you're just somebody who dabbled in it a little bit in the past and now you're excited. You have the opportunity to finally give it your all, or just give it a lot more energy than you used to. I think the first thing to do here is to decide whether you want to pick up where you stopped, or if you really want to just start something new. This is a difficult decision, but it doesn't have a lot of pressure behind it. So if you used to work on art, if you had some aspirations or something, it can be really easy to just go back to where you were. I've done this several times where in my teaching career, I just took a lot of time off of making art. Usually it would be about a year because I would work on making a lot of stuff during the summer, and then the school year would hit and I would get swept up and get busy. And so I'd kind of come back to things in May or June each year and go, well, where did I leave off? I seem to have several paintings I didn't finish. Do I really want to dive back into painting? Do I want to spend more time on my ink pieces or just drawing? Naturally, I would feel a little bit overwhelmed each time I did this because it felt like I'd stopped so many things and I couldn't possibly pick up all those pieces. And this is perhaps why it's important at this juncture to make that decision, to decide where you're going to pick up if you are going to pick up. The thing that's nice about this is you don't have to try to pick up every piece at the same time. If you were invested in art at some point, but not very heavily, you don't need to feel like you need to go back to what you were doing. Maybe the last time you worked on art, it was pretty casual. It was with a lot of pencils and colored pencils. Maybe it's time to give watercolor or acrylic paint a try. But I find that if you're starting to take this seriously for the first time, picking one area to hone in on can honestly be really rewarding. Partially because it dismantles all of the other expectations. If you're just going to focus on digital art, for example, it clears out other thoughts that might be kind of plaguing you and coming at you. When I sit down to draw, because I have so many supplies at my disposal, if I don't have a clear image of what I'm going to work on in that particular session, it can be a little bit daunting. Am I going to use my colored pencils here? Watercolor, acrylic, oil, my brush pens, my acrylic pens? If I know what I'm going to be working on, whether it's a sketchbook session or even a drawing like you're watching take place in the background, that limited scope honestly makes it less stressful. So if you are deciding to pick back up with some of the pieces from your past here, I would encourage you to just focus on a specific medium, maybe even just a specific styling at the beginning. and then you can expand as you kind of get back in. A lot of this is to limit the possibility of disappointment by limiting the scope of expectations. But you could also decide to start anew entirely. As I've mentioned, this might be starting with a new medium, but it might be taking a really different path. If you did decide to start on digital art when you dive back in, maybe if you've done nothing with digital art at all, this will really feel like you're turning over a new leaf and you're trying something totally different. But I would say most of the time that this happens, it's shifting media more dramatically than that. Maybe it's shifting from being a writer or a cook into being a painter. Maybe it's shifting from a ceramicist into being a drawer, or vice versa. I've known many students over the years that put a lot of time into art and they really enjoyed the creative aspect of it, but something never felt like it was catching correctly. And sometimes those kids, when they shifted to clay or to sculpture of some kind, everything clicked. Everything made sense. I'm thinking of 3 students right now that I taught in drawing and painting classes, and one of them switched to ceramics, one of them switched to sculpture, and one of them switched to fibers and metalsmithing. And when each of those 3 students switched, it was just like this wonderful, beautiful light bulb came on, and everything made sense, and the journey became far more rewarding for them. So if you do decide that you're going to start anew, I would give yourself some grace, and I would make sure that you try something that might have a new, exciting path before you. But once you know that, it does dismantle a little bit of that stress, and you can start diving in. You can start taking on new things. That decision can sometimes create decision paralysis, and you can sit there for a long time just trying to decide what you want to do. And of course, I'm talking about this from personal experience as well, because there's been so many times where I've decided to take it seriously for the first time, and maybe it's a different kind of art that I've been doing this to, and maybe it's more akin to restarting, which we'll talk about after this. But every time I've found if I don't actively make a decision to narrow my scope, my expectations are too high and I'm really quickly and easily disappointed. And that's just not something that you need as you're starting a new journey. Alright, so you've decided what your area of focus is going to be as you dive back in. One of the first things, just like I mentioned with the absolute beginner section earlier, is you're going to want to focus on the fundamentals of that particular medium, that particular style. These might be things like I mentioned earlier, like line, shape, form, perspective, but they might be different. Whatever your specific medium is, I would look up what that looks like. You can do this easily on this format, and you can do this easily just on Google, typing in like, what are the fundamentals of acrylic painting, the fundamentals of watercolor painting? And I would actually start with some videos. I would start with content that you find, and I would pick up those pieces and just start moving with things. It can be a little bit humbling sometimes to dive back into it or to dive into it seriously, but I find that if you put that aside, if you put your ego and your pride aside and humble yourself, you can actually move much, much more quickly. So starting with those fundamentals can be a really, really good thing to do. And honestly, the video format is a lovely way to do that. Another thing that I have to say to piggyback right off of that, though, is that you need to balance your time with joy-filled drawings and practice, not just practice. This sounds similar to what I mentioned in the first segment, but I find that it's actually far more important for people who are taking it seriously for the first time, people who have some background in art prior, to not just dedicate all their time to practice. This is a trap I fell into, and I've watched a lot of other artists fall into as well. You can kind of feel like you're having to make up for this time that you've lost. And it can be really, really, really tempting to almost punish yourself, to go, I don't get to work on the fun stuff. Like I was lazy for years, or I didn't work on this and I should have. So now I'm getting back in. I'm going to just grind for 6 months. I'll have all my skills and then I'll be able to apply them. First of all, it doesn't work that way. Second of all, there's no use in avoiding the stuff that is the purpose that got you into this. If you really want to draw comics, and you are basically keeping yourself from drawing comics until your skills are quote unquote there, they'll never be there. Most artists never feel like they're quite ready to embark on the journey that they really want to embark on. So make sure that along that entire journey, you diving back into something, you relearning the fundamentals or learning new fundamentals, that you are continually involved in drawing things, in making things that bring you joy. And I would encourage you that whatever your kind of long-term goal is, just start working on like the small versions of it now. If your goal is to make a comic, start laying out panels. Start taking a first stab at those drawings and see how they turn out. Are they going to be good? Probably not, but you never know. And even if they're not that good, they kind of guide you in the right direction that you want to go. A lot of times when you make a bad drawing, quote unquote, a drawing that doesn't achieve your purpose, if you can allow yourself to humbly look back at it, not to tear it out of your sketchbook and throw it away or forget about it, but to look back at it, it has a lot to teach you. Those drawings will often show you everything that you need to know about your next steps as an artist. But I just want to throw that out there because it can be very tempting to just dedicate all your time to practice. And it's not sustaining. It's not a fun way to work on art. And actually, I don't even think it's the most efficient way to do it. This is different, very different than what I believed when I was younger. And certainly, I changed on my viewpoint of this over my 11 years of teaching in the public schools. Originally, I was very much like, no, you need to hammer all your skills and have these in. And over time, I've realized that maybe if we were androids, that would work. But we're not. We're humans. We're emotional creatures. And art always involves emotion and soul in some capacity. And because of that, you cannot divorce them. You have to make sure that there's some integration there. So seek hard after whatever it is that you desire and balance that with your practice time. Practice is important. I really think that it's key for pretty much every artist to continue to hone their craft. It's a rewarding thing. It allows you to see growth. It can kind of propel you forward. The balance of that is something that each artist needs to work out kind of individually, though. But I think that aiming for a 50-50 balance at the beginning is usually a really productive place to start. Another thing here is keep records of your work so that you can come back and see progress. I think it's really important if you're kind of taking it seriously for the first time / diving back into things to be able to see how you're growing, because there's a propensity here to be unkind to yourself, to be judgmental about your work and your progress and how far you could have been if you had never stepped away from it in the first place. It's really good to keep your sketchbooks. Don't tear things out. Keep sketchbooks in the first place, actually, but keep files of whatever your work is. However you work, make sure that there are examples of that work around. And I would encourage you every couple months, go back and take a peek at things. When I look at my sketchbooks from 2 years ago, I kind of just laugh now. Not because that work is bad or is humorous, but because I've grown so much since then. So many of my drawings have so much more life in them, which frankly was one of the aspects I really felt like my artwork was lacking. The goofy little robots have humor to them. They have personality. And I always felt like my drawings had no emotion or personality to them. And so it's fun to see that aspect, that ephemeral, kind of ethereal thing coming into my artwork. It's one of the most rewarding things that I can find in my recent work. The last thing here before we go on to our third and final category is seek community. If you are a little bit older and you are getting into art for the first time, really taking it seriously, you're going to benefit from community. Finding community can be very different depending on where you live, how old you are, what you're up to, etc. If you are still in school or of school age, it can be much easier. You can honestly just take a class and you're already in community just by proxy. If you're a little bit older or it feels a little bit safer, I would encourage you to check out some Discord communities. We have one attached to this channel. It's linked in pretty much every one of my videos, so feel free to check that out. But if you want to look at a bigger community, there are others. Find other artists on this platform that you like their work, you like the way they talk, and check out their artistic communities. Many of them have Discord servers nowadays, and it's good to invest yourself into those things. We need to see that other people are working and struggling on things in order to have a better, more accurate perspective on what the journey looks like. But that kind of wraps up for taking it seriously for the first time. And let's go ahead and slide into our last and final category, restarting. This is a tough category. If this is you, it likely means that art meant a lot to you at one point. You likely spent a lot of time in school drawing, scribbling along the side of your notes, doodling, and yet at some point, life went a different direction and you stopped putting much time into art. Maybe a year passed, maybe 10, but now you're looking at diving back in, and it kind of sucks. Maybe you picked up a pencil and tried to draw for the first time in 5 years, and yep, you just can't do it anymore. The skills have dried up. This is incredibly frustrating. There's often a merger of excitement and exhilaration about being able to dive back into something that has sat long dormant in your mind. And then there's also the fear. Can I actually do it? Can I get back to where I was? Were those childish dreams just that? Childish? Or can I actually do something with this? But fret not. Art skills that haven't been used in a long time are a little like desert plants. Once watered, they spring back to life, and though they might need a little nursing to get back to full strength, they often can. I've watched this in a lot of people, just from my own personal perspective. Obviously, I've dealt with this myself, where I have not worked on a particular art medium, and then 7, 8, 10 years later, I get back into it, and obviously I'm rusty for a while. But I've seen this with a lot of other adults in my life. People now who are retiring and finally have the time, and so they're getting back into art. And yes, for the first couple months, things are often a little bit rocky. And sometimes people don't even stick with the same exact things they were doing prior. But as they start to take it seriously again, as they start to restart that journey, they find their love kindled for the art making process, for their creativity and their imagination once more. And a lot of these long dormant things start to rise up from the soil. This is the hardest category from a mental standpoint, I believe. I found myself here perhaps 3 years ago, and it was incredibly tough. Multiple times I found myself wondering if this was worth it, if I ought to give up and just relegate myself to the sidelines of art. Many times I kind of arbitrarily decided that I just couldn't do it, that it must be some innate talent that I just don't have. And yet stubbornly, I stuck to it, and slowly, over time, my skills began to improve and to catch back up with where they had been years ago. As more time passed, I excelled past my old skills and became the best that I've ever been in most categories. There's still certain things that I have not dived back into, and so I look back at old sketches and go, wow, I was better at drawing characters back then than I am now, better at drawing people. But I haven't put a lot of time into those things in the last couple years. So I think something that I need to chew on for just a minute is, how is this different from the category that came before it? How is restarting different from taking it seriously for the first time? Because taking it seriously for the first time, I kind of talked about the fact that that implies you probably had some art something. I think here, though, it's much more serious than that. This is, you had an ambition to be a professional artist or to be a pretty hardcore hobbyist. This is, you went to art school. This is, you took a bunch of art classes in high school. This is, maybe your parents were artists or people in your local community, and it's where a lot of your free time went. This is not necessarily assuming that you wanted to be a professional artist, but that art had a serious place in your life and then it fell away. And I think that is a pretty distinct difference than really just giving it your serious all for the first time. This is giving it your serious all again, restarting that journey. And sometimes, like I mentioned in the prior one, it's picking up the pieces, and sometimes it's starting entirely from scratch. Both of these decisions are difficult. They're fraught with their own individual pieces. If you're picking up those pieces from an earlier journey, sometimes that can actually propel you forward much quicker because you can retain some of that knowledge. Maybe the skills come back really, really quickly. So that's something that I would focus on at the beginning, is deciding whether you're picking up where you left off or if you're starting something new from scratch, just like I mentioned in the prior category. So I won't tarry on that too much. But the big thing I want to focus on here is giving yourself grace. I know this is something I hammer on the channel a lot, but I think in this particular moment, it's incredibly important. And I know this because I've been there and I've given myself a really, really hard time, because I'm looking at the progress that I've made in the last 2 or 3 years and going, dude, if you would have just swallowed your fear when you were 22 and decided to push with this, like by 25, you would have been the artist you are today. And there is some truth to that. I don't think that it's particularly productive to dwell on that because you can't change the past. And so putting that time and energy into that is a waste of time and energy. But that's why you have to be gracious with yourself. It's too easy to slip down those paths. and to blame yourself, and to, even as you start to make progress, to go, well, would have been awesome to have made this progress a decade ago, man. It's just not good for you as a human. It's not good for you as a person. So try to be gracious with yourself. I think this is a much more prudent thing when it comes to this category specifically, because this category assumes you're restarting a journey, that you were serious at some point and something happened. Maybe something outside of your control, or maybe you, like me, were just afraid. I wish I had a better excuse. I wish I had a better reason. But at the end of the day, when I was younger and really ambitious with my art and wanted to do big things, at the end of the day, the reason I didn't is because I was afraid. I was afraid of the risks I would have to take. I was insecure about my artwork. I didn't feel like it stacked up to anyone else. I let those things control the amount of time that I put in my work, so it didn't get much better. And it became easier at some point just to go, I guess I'm just not that kind of artist. I'm pretty good at graphic design. I seem to be quite good at teaching. I guess I'll just do that. I did that for long enough, and in some ways kind of tricked myself into feeling like I was okay with my creative endeavors. But after I got out of teaching and put a lot more time into just thinking about those things and dwelling on them, I realized I'd basically been tricking myself that whole time. That's not going to be the case for everyone. There are teachers who are incredibly satisfied with teaching alone. But as an artist and a teacher, the teaching part of me, the part that nourished young minds and helped people achieve things, was being well fed. And the artistic creative side of me was dying of starvation. And I just didn't know it, because the anxieties and the stress of that workload never really gave me enough time to sit down and process and think. And so I've had to be tremendously gracious with myself, or I'm not sure I ever would have stuck with this a second time. So I just want to pass that on to you, because being gracious with yourself, if you are starting the journey again for a second or a third or a fourth time, it's going to be really, really important. Be kind to yourself and be gracious with yourself. It's not only good self-care, but it's actually like a more productive way to handle this. After that though, like I mentioned a moment ago, I would pick a path and realize that you don't have to stick with it too. I think that especially when you're diving back in and you're probably going to dive in pretty strong, it can be kind of hard if you distribute all of your time across a really wide realm of things. And so if you focus on something specific, it's going to make your life easier. I think sometimes for restarting the journey, it can be really good to kind of clear up a kind of amorphous thing that sits in the back of a lot of artists' minds about, do you want to do this as a hobby, like just for yourself because it's a good thing to do, it's stress relieving and it's joy filled? Or do you want to do something with this professionally? I know that that dichotomy is not perfect, but I think that having that internal dialogue is really, really beneficial. You know, for me, I've always wanted to work as a professional artist, but I think I've shied away from ever saying that because that opens you up to all kinds of critique, either from the outside or from the inside. So it's easier to just be like, I'm just a hobbyist. I'm working on my hobby art. And you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's key to be honest with yourself about what you really desire, what you want. And it's probably not going to be one only. You know, maybe it could be just the hobby side of things. You're just doing this because it's good to do, it's good for your soul. But if you do have some leanings toward that professional side, like you'd like to make some money doing it, or you just like the satisfaction of people putting your pieces in their house, then be honest with yourself about that, because it's a very different goal. And knowing what your goals are is always going to make disappointment easier to avoid because your expectations are more well understood. I know that it's not a perfect dichotomy between hobbyist and professional, but it is generally a good thing to kind of chew on in your mind. Figure out where you're going to go. I think honestly, if you're restarting this journey, I would probably restart with the idea of hobby regardless. And then if you really want to be a professional, kind of set up some tiers where it's like, I'm going to be hobbyist for a little while to get my feet back in it, where I don't have to stress about making art that is commercially viable. And then slowly I'm going to start slivering off chunks of that and putting them toward that professional energy. That's what I'm planning on doing here. I'm planning on getting prints made of a lot of my ink pieces so I can start having them in the little local gallery here. My wife and I are looking into doing some art shows here in the next year or two once we're moved into the next house and we don't have all the craziness of moving to deal with. And that's kind of the way that I'm looking to structure things. Right now, I'm really working on honing skills, getting back into things, continuing to produce content here, and gonna kind of go toward making more educational content as time goes on too. But the actual professional artistic standpoint is I'm going to slowly put more and more time into that. So hopefully in the next 5 years, that's basically what I'll be doing. But I'll keep you guys updated. I guess it's going to be a long journey. I'm pretty cautious by nature, and fortunately I have the ability to do that right now. As I mentioned in both of the prior categories, I think it's really important to balance your work here too. So if you're diving back in, you're restarting your journey, make sure that you balance the amount of time you're practicing on things and the amount of time that you're diving into things that bring you joy. I'm not going to belabor the point. I've mentioned it in the 2 prior sections. Hopefully you listened to those, but maybe you skipped just to here. But even if you skip just to this point, balance the amount of time that you work on the things that bring you joy and the things that are honing your skills. Start with a 50-50 balance and then change it to better fit your needs. The last thing here, especially if you're restarting your artistic journey, is try to get over the fear of putting yourself out there. There's a tremendous chance that if you are doing this, you're restarting a journey, that you have some desire to push your art in directions it's never gone before. So try to be less controlled by fear. If you have a desire to do art shows, just do it. I know it's going to be stressful. I know it's going to be a little bit scary, but you know what? Once you're in it, it just kind of rolls and it happens pretty quickly and you're there and it's okay. If you want to have your work in a gallery, then go and check out their work, see if your work is somewhat comparable, it kind of aligns with the stuff that's in that gallery, and then talk to somebody. The worst that they can do generally is just say no, or we're not accepting anybody right now. Yes, you have to put yourself out there, you have to risk that disappointment, but if you're really diving back into this artistic journey, you're restarting things, maybe it's time to be a little bit more courageous with it. It's going to be a little bit scary, it's going to be a little anxiety-inducing, but the best things in life always require some risk. I've done just 2 art shows now, I suppose, in the last year, and both of them have been anxiety-inducing. The one went really well, the other one I didn't sell a thing. And that's how it goes sometimes. But you don't know what it's going to be like until you go do it. Now that I understand what it's like, it's way less stressful because it's less of an unknown. So whatever it is that you want to do, I would encourage you just start moving on those things. If you want to make your comic, just start doing it. It doesn't have to be good at first. If you want to start selling artwork online, just start doing it. If you want to have an Instagram where you post daily artwork, just start doing it. Give yourself some grace when you miss a day and just start doing it. But whatever those things are, I would encourage you to take the risks, to put yourself out there. There's a good chance that the last time you started on this art journey, that you didn't do that. And you know what? Maybe now it's time for some change. Well, what about my thoughts, my position on this? I didn't really intend to, but over the course of the entire podcast, I've kind of talked about my perspective on this. I am, in a lot of ways, in the second, stage of my art journey. I feel like most of it paused while I was teaching. I've now resumed it, and it's just picking up momentum as time goes on. Right now, I'm in a little bit of a, not stagnation, but a slower ascent period just because things are really busy here. I'm focusing on other things in conjunction with my artwork. But the next stage for me is I'm really going to be focusing on starting to try to sell a lot of my ink pieces, making making stickers and making little prints, because a lot of them will actually translate pretty well to that. So that's kind of the next stage that I'm going to be hopefully diving into. The goal is to be able to sell artwork and make people's lives happier and better with the kooky, strange little robots and dragons and stuff that I produce. That's the goal, and I'm starting slowly to work toward that. Every couple months I try to add in something new so that I'm always moving a little bit forward and always progressing. And I honestly am happier as an artist and more fulfilled as an artist than I ever have been. Partially because I stepped away from it for a little while, got better perspective on what I wanted, and was able to dive back in. And I'm 38 years old now, so it's easier for me to look back over long periods of time and more accurately assess my progress, what I'm capable of, what I'm not capable of, what I want to put time into, and what I don't. And all of those things have made it easier. So if you're quite a bit younger than me and you're having similar struggles, just know that it tends to get better. Your view on the world and perspective gets a little bit better the older you get. You have a little bit more time to actually parse things out and look at life. So, as always, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I hope this was beneficial to you in some way. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments on your art journey, which of these 3 stages, or perhaps other stages I forgot, that you are in now in the comments below. Thank you to my patrons who are on the screen right now. If you want to check out the Patreon or the Discord, they are both linked below. Well, have a good one, y'all. See you soon.